We do want to remind everyone once again that the meeting is being recorded. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. And we're going to go to the next slide. So as I said, just to refresh people very briefly on the climate protection program. Again, many of you in the public were deeply invested in the development of the climate protection program. We got tremendous engagement and public comment, which was, critical in what we decided to do and what the EQC actually decided to adopt. But again, just in terms of the purpose and scope of the climate protection program, which did, start at the beginning of 2022. And we always talked about these three goals, to essentially significantly reduce emissions while promoting equity. So again, promoting equity, alleviating burdens, promoting benefits for what we call environmental justice communities in the rural, and then doing this in such a way that we can also potentially contain costs for businesses and consumers. So the climate protection program in the scope section, you'll see that it says reduce greenhouse gas emissions from sources in Oregon. You'll see achieve co-benefits from reduced emissions of other air contaminants. And then you'll also see this enhanced public welfare for Oregon's communities. Next slide, please. So again, essentially the climate protection program, it sets mandatory limits on greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels used throughout the state. That's both in residential, commercial, and industrial settings. It covers almost all uses of fossil fuels in Oregon. So this includes things like, natural gas used in buildings or in appliances, gasoline and diesel that's used in transportation or in off-road purposes, and, things like natural gas in industrial settings. The primary tool, next slide, please. The primary tool by which the program actually, can put these mandatory limits in place and reduce emissions is what we call our climate protection program caps. And by using the cap, essentially the program is targeted to reduce emissions 50% by 2035 and 90% by 2050. Next slide, please. So just again, so we're going to turn to the rule language and the proposed rules soon, but just again to remind folks, the way the program works is we have covered entities in the program. And the covered entities are essentially the companies, the businesses that are being regulated under the climate protection program. These are the folks that have to demonstrate that their emissions are being reduced. And we have three groups of covered entities in the program. We have covered fuel suppliers and we have covered stationary sources. The covered stationary sources, folks might be familiar, it's with this smaller universe of remaining GHG emissions that happen at industrial facilities. And that's actually done through a best available emissions reduction approach. The primary bulk of the emissions in the program and what you see in the actual cap is the emissions that are actually regulated for our covered fuel suppliers. We have two groups of covered fuel suppliers. One group is our suppliers of fuels other than natural gas. Those are the folks who are bringing in like the kerosene, the propane, the diesel, and the gasoline. And then we have the term that we use in the rule for our local distribution companies. But again, in everyday parlance, that would be our natural gas utilities. So what we are going to be talking about today in this proposed temporary rule is just the covered emissions as they apply to local distribution companies. There's nothing else that we're going to be talking about today in this proposed rule that impacts those other covered entities. So go to the next slide. So again, just to refocus or reorientate everyone, covered emissions is the term that we use in the climate protection program. Covered emissions essentially, again, are those emissions that are under that cap that we showed you earlier. These are the emissions that are actually being reduced and coming down under the program. And you can see here on the screen here in front of you, for our natural gas utilities, they're essentially being regulated for all the emissions associated with natural gas that's used in the state. So some of the exclusions to what's actually covered for our natural gas utilities we don't cover the electricity sector. So again, natural gas that's provided to power plants is actually not covered under the program because the climate protection program doesn't actually regulate the electricity generating section. And another important exclusion is any biomass derived fuels. Emissions from biomass or biofuels is actually one way in which our covered entities can comply with the program. There is no emissions obligations for emissions that are generated from biomass derived fuels. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to the next slide. So now we're going to actually, with that little bit of grounding, we're going to talk a little bit more about today's proposed rule amendments. And what you're going to see here in front of you is the actual rule language that we're going to be talking about in detail. Again, this is in the materials that were released for today's meeting, but what you see here in front of you is the portion of the climate protection program, which delves into covered emissions for, again, our local distribution companies, more generally known as our 3 natural gas utilities. So the rule citation for those folks who want to go to the rule, it's 340-271-0110. And then this is all under section 4B. Again, if you look at the materials, you'll see more of the text, but this is the text that we're going to zero in for today's conversation. And so under 4BA, you actually see, covered emissions include emissions of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in metric CO2 tons, so CO2 equivalent, that would result from the complete combustion or oxidation of the annual quantity of natural gas imported, sold, or distributed for use in this state. What we're going to be talking about today, what is the content of this proposed rulemaking, is really under B. And B, as you can see here, it says covered emissions do not include. So you could think of these as things that are excluded from the covered emissions. And again, you'll see in some of this language what I just talked about before. We don't cover the electricity sector, biomass derived fuels are not covered under the program, or not covered emissions. But we're going to be spending the bulk of today talking about Roman numeral 3, which right now says emissions that result from non-combustion related processes that use natural gas as determined by DEQ. And again, this is all under Rule 0110, which is titled Covered Entities, I think, and Covered Emissions Applicability. So I'm going to ask Whitney to go to the next slide. You can kind of skip this, Whitney. Let's just go to the next slide. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some processes here, and then we're going to turn to the language that we're actually proposing in the proposed rule. So just again, to give folks a sense, when natural gas is combusted, as you see in this first slide, you basically release GHG emissions into the atmosphere. I think we're all clear on that. When DEQ staff was working on, how natural gas is used at industrial facilities across the state, one of the things that we identified with looking at how natural gas was used at some of our industrial facilities is we actually learned about a source that used natural gas in a non-combustion process. It was an oxidation process. And essentially how this worked is GHG emissions weren't actually released into the atmosphere. What we found was emissions were actually avoided because those gas molecules were actually captured and stored in a product. So at the time when we had learned about this, DEQ staff thought, well, if these emissions are being captured and stored in a product, we may want to go ahead and adjust a natural gas utility's covered emissions, because we think these emissions have not actually gone into the atmosphere, but instead have actually been captured and stored in the product. So I'm going to go to the next slide, Whitney. So that's why we sort of made the determination to not actually have that part of covered emissions. Since the time that we have been working on the climate protection program, we have actually, DEQ staff has actually received some recent air permit modifications. And basically what these air permit modifications are requesting, or what they're proposing, is they're proposing to use natural gas in a way where the natural gas is not going to be combusted. So it's a non-combustion process. It is actually what we believe to be an oxidation process. But unlike the oxidation process we just discussed, there would actually be emissions that are released into the atmosphere. These emissions are not avoided. They're not actually going to be captured or stored in product. We're essentially going to see a process where this oxidation process is going to be sort of used for on-site energy. And the result is going to be GHG emissions that are released into the atmosphere, almost exactly the same as if those emissions were combusted. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in this temporary rule is we wanted to revisit the language that's in Roman numeral 3, because we actually do realize that that language is not very clear. There could be alternate understanding of what that language means. There could be alternate interpretations of what that language means. As you can hear, DEQ staff in drafting that language, our intent was really only to have an option to adjust the local distributions covered and to cover the emissions for those types of emissions that are in an oxidation process, again, where they're captured and stored in a product, none when they're actually released into the atmosphere. So we want to go ahead and make sure that the language is very clear, and we actually want to add a lot more specificity to the language that you see under Roman numeral 3. And so what we have right now, and I think what's up on the screen, if I can try to read my screen because I have so many windows open, but the language that we're proposing right now is that in the temporary rule is an amendment that would say emissions avoided where the use of natural gas results in greenhouse gas emissions captured and stored within a product if sufficiently documented by information provided to DEQ. And again, our intent in making this amendment is to be very, very clear, to be absolutely clear that emissions, whether they are through combustion or whether they're through oxidation, that are from the use of natural gas, are actually covered emissions under the program, with this kind of small exception for where we see that the emissions are avoided because the gas molecules are basically captured and stored in a product and therefore not released into the atmosphere. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, as I talked about earlier, when we have a temporary rulemaking and we want to make sure that, what's the reasons for our temporary rulemaking? And definitely in this rulemaking, we think it's actually critically important that we make this clarification, that we make this language change, because we do think failing to act promptly will result in serious prejudice to interests of our local distribution companies and also parties contemplating business investments and operations implicated by this rule amendment. So what I mean by that is parties that might be contemplating moving forward with these oxidation type of processes for natural gas. Why do we think there's serious prejudice? Because we do think it's critical for our local distribution companies to have a clear understanding of their covered emissions and compliance obligations under the program. That's absolutely critical for them as they're trying to make sure that they can comply with the climate protection program. We think for our local distribution companies and their industrial customers they do require the certainty. They needed to develop cost-effective compliance strategies, and they need to do it to implement appropriate business decisions. And again, if our local distribution companies, if our natural gas utilities were actually not able to make appropriate decisions or take necessary actions to reduce their covered emissions, there can be serious consequences for them when they're trying to comply with the program. Next slide, please. Companies that basically own these facilities are also potentially interested in, or other companies interested in similar activities. They also have an incredibly urgent need to understand the regulatory implications for operating, again, these natural gas oxidation processes. We do think for parties who are contemplating thinking about implementing these types of processes, they need to know that these are going to be covered emissions under the climate protection program. They may go forward and make investments. And if the Environmental Quality Commission was to make changes to the climate protection program later as part of our standard rulemaking processes, they didn't have the right information, and it could be that they have to make costly changes. The other reason that we think immediate action is needed is that we do anticipate that these processes and these emissions are going to be reported soon. Our understanding is in the air permit modifications, there is a desire to move those air permit modifications quickly. And we could see that this would be happening as soon as the first quarter of next year, which means we could see these emissions starting to be reported as part of the 2023 emissions reporting year. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the other thing is we do think this potentially could jeopardize the climate protection program's emission reduction targets. Again, the climate protection program's emission caps would essentially fail to cover the intended scope of the program if these types of emissions weren't part of the emissions associated with natural gas use that are actually regulated and reduced under the program. We do think that undermines the environmental integrity of the climate protection program, and it can also jeopardize our overall state emission reduction targets. So again, just to recap, for all of those reasons mentioned above, DEQ staff does think that we should be moving forward with this temporary rule amendment. We do want to propose this temporary rule amendment to the EQC at the next Environmental Quality Commission meeting. We do think immediate action is required, and we do think failure to act promptly does, seriously prejudice the public and these affected parties. So we're going to go ahead and probably switch to opening up our public comment period. Again, hopefully folks understand what we were presenting here today. We did want to let everyone know that, of course, you can give public comment at today's meeting. We are also requesting written public comment. You can go ahead and send any emailed comments to us at the email address that you see on the screen. We're also going to ask for folks to send us written comment by mail if they wish. Again, there's an address up here on the screen if you'd wish to send written comments. And then we are also going to be just reminding everyone and asking you, if you can, to send us your comments by 4 p.m. on October 31st. Again, that is just so we have time to review those comments and think about those comments and make sure that we can review all the great information that we expect from the public before we go to the next EQC meeting with the proposed rule amendment. So I'm going to go through here and just, we're probably going to go ahead and transition here to public comment. Rachel's going to be managing the public comment for everyone, just so you know, but just again, the way the public comments are going to work is we're going to ask everyone to raise their hand to get into the queue. So feel free to start raising your hand now if you like. If you are participating by phone to get into the queue, you're going to have to hit *9, and then you're going to have to say, and then basically the way it's going to work is Rachel is going to have to unmute you. And then once Rachel unmutes you, you can go ahead and give your public comment. We are going to ask you to say your name and your affiliation before speaking, if you have one. If you don't have one, that's fine. Since we not ask you to keep your comments brief. And then, of course, if you want to provide more detailed comments, you can go ahead and submit it through the email and through the mail. Okay, so if folks want to go ahead and raise their hands, we can get you all in the queue. Like I said, Rachel's going to call your name so that you know that we're going to ask you for public comment. And like I said, just give her a moment to go ahead and unmute you so that you can give your public comments.
Thank you, Nicole. Looks like we've got a number of people ready to give comments, so I'm going to just go ahead and call on the first person, Kathy Moyd. Oh, sorry, Kathy. Could you just give it a moment and unmute? I'll ask you to unmute, and there you go. Thank you.
Okay. Seems like old home week. This is Kathy Moyd. I do advocacy for the League of Women Voters, but I'm here on my own behalf. I do have one question. I do support doing this, but I have one question that also generates a lot of greenhouse gases, and that's the steam methane reforming in order to make hydrogen. Would that now have to be counted, or is that still excluded because of the oxidation in the first sentence? Is that understood?
Yeah, hi, Kathy. I know this is exclusively talking about the natural gas processes. We did, under the climate protection program, and, we do talk about the fact that future technologies like hydrogen would be used, but let me just make sure and see if anyone else from my staff wants to clarify. Just give me 1 second.
Well, this is the steam methane reforming is the method used now for making most hydrogen. So yeah, it's generating a lot of carbon dioxide.
Do you want me to jump in there, Nicole?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Thanks. So hi, Kathy. Yeah, so if you're using a steam methane reforming reaction that's using natural gas as a feedstock, and those emissions are then being emitted to the atmosphere after that process and not being captured and stored within a product, then those would be included under the cap, and we would regulate those at the natural gas utility.
Even though it's not explicitly combustion or oxidation?
It would be an oxidation process.
Yeah, so Matt, just to clarify, following up on Kathy's point, it would be an oxidation process since those emissions are not being avoided because they're not being captured or stored in the product. It would be covered as a covered emission for our local distribution companies. Did I say that correctly?
Exactly, yes.
Right, thank you, Matt.
Okay, I definitely support this with, especially with that clarification.
All right, thank you for your comment and your question, Kathy.
And next, we have Mary Morelands. If you could go ahead and unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment. My name is Mary Morelands, and I work at Northwest Natural. I just wanted to share that Northwest Natural is integrating low carbon fuels into our system, and we appreciate that DEQ is committed to facilitating decarbonization via alternative and renewable fuels. We urge that any rule revision continue to support inclusion of innovation that allows for new renewable and alternative fuels, and would be concerned if this rulemaking narrows rather than expands opportunities for decarbonization throughout the energy economy. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we have Pat DeLequo. In just a moment while I ask you to unmute. Great.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Pat DeLequil. I'm a clean energy technology expert, as well as a systems modeler and climate policy analyst. I testify here today in support of the DEQ staff recommendation for a temporary rulemaking to the Oregon Climate Protection Plan. It appears this rule clarification is needed because Amazon is seeking to exempt the emissions coming from on-site fuel cells that run on methane gas and used to power their operations at several energy-intensive data centers in Eastern Oregon. As I understand it, the basis of this claim is that the gas is oxidized and not combustion. Such a statement is both technically incorrect and misleading. First, it's technically incorrect because the natural gas fuel cell systems, like the example in my written testimony, include a steam reformer that converts methane to natural gas, converts the methane and natural gas into hydrogen by reacting it with steam, and a reformer, whereby the methane is reacted with water to produce carbon dioxide and hydrogen. It's misleading because the fact that the hydrogen, which is resulting from the reforming process, is oxidized is not relevant because the process that uses the natural gas emits CO2 at the same rate per therm of gas as combustion. I strongly support the proposed rulemaking, which will affirm that the requirement of the CPP apply to gas users like Amazon and the methane utilities that supply fossil fuels. The amendment proposed by DEQ more clearly defines the exemption language to only apply to uses of natural gas that result in the embodied CO2 being captured and stored within a product and not admitted to the atmosphere. Amazon's proposal would result in an enormous increase in methane gas use in Oregon and greenhouse gas emissions, leading to ever worsening climate impacts like extreme heat, wildfires, droughts, and impacts to the livelihoods of Oregons across the state. Amazon claims to be the largest corporate producer of renewable energy and on a path to powering their operations with 100% renewable energy by 2025. This proposal flies in the face of that pledge. I thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Next, we have Joshua Basafin. Go ahead and comment, please.
Good morning. Good morning. My name's Joshua Basafin. I'm with Climate Solutions. Climate Solutions strongly supports the proposed temporary rule change. Our organization was actively engaged in the rulemaking process to develop the climate protection program last year. And as staff have indicated, emissions resulting from gas oxidation would not be captured and stored in a product, and instead directly emitted into the atmosphere with the same damaging emission results as if the gas was combusted. It was never the intent of the climate protection program that such emissions be exempted, and the proposed language makes that clear. Moreover, allowing projects to move forward that utilize gas oxidizing technology as outside the purview of the greenhouse gas regulatory regime will send a market signal that these potent emissions may not be regulated. And as Oregon continues to decarbonize our buildings, transportation, industrial, and electricity sectors, we must create regulatory certainty, not only to ensure decarbonization plans succeed, but so that entities within those sectors are able to adequately plan for new projects. We therefore strongly concur with staff's assessment that this temporary rulemaking is necessary and justified, and we appreciate DEQ staff's rapid response to this issue and expedited rulemaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lisa Arkin. I will unmute you.
Thank you. This is Lisa Arkin. I'm the Executive Director of Beyond Toxics, and I'm testifying today to support the DEQ's proposal to clarify that fossil gas that is regulated by the requirements of the CPP program apply to both the suppliers of natural gas as well as the users of natural gas. This rulemaking is necessary to define, confirm, and affirm that the requirements of the CPP apply to all of these entities. Large companies, whether they are manufacturers or provide other kinds of customer services, as well as the methane gas utilities that work with them, must be regulated under the CPP. And I want to say that Beyond Toxics has served on the CPP Rules Advisory Committee from the beginning, and we've been very engaged in supporting the successful implementation of the program. And that is because we believe the CPP is absolutely essential to achieving our state's climate pollution reduction goals. So I appreciate the DEQ's speed to address this lack of clarity in the program, and we will also be submitting written comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kellen Belcher. I apologize if I didn't get that right. I will unmute you.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Kellen Belcher, and I'm a manager on Environmental Defense Fund's U.S. climate team. The Climate Protection Program's limit on greenhouse gas emissions is an essential component of Oregon's ability to make progress towards its climate goals, and I strongly support this temporary rulemaking and ongoing efforts to close loopholes and strengthen the Climate Protection Program. The Climate Protection Program makes Oregon only one of 3 states in the nation, alongside California and Washington, to place a firm declining limit on climate pollution from natural gas supplied by natural gas utilities. Like California's program and like Washington's program, the Climate Protection Program must include greenhouse gases from both combustion and oxidation of natural gas supplied by LDCs in its definition of covered emissions, where those emissions are not captured and stored. We deeply appreciate that DEQ is acting promptly, and EDF strongly supports confirming that emissions from oxidized natural gas are covered emissions subject to a compliance obligation. This is an important element in order for the CPP to be a comprehensive program that helps ensure Oregon will meet its climate goals for capped sectors. We'll plan to provide additional detail in a written comment. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Jane Stackhouse. I will unmute you.
Thank you. My name is Jane Stackhouse, and I'm not sure if you can actually hear me.
We can hear you, yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. My name is Jane Stackhouse, and I am a member of the Metro Climate Action Team and also Climate Reality Project. I'm a trained Climate Reality Project leader and also a member of Oregon Indivisible's Climate, Energy, and Environment team. My background is as a corporate trainer. So I was not really catching the science the first read through on these rules. And I want to thank Nicole and Whitney and Matthew and Rachel and the rest of the DEQ staff for identifying this issue and working speedily to solve it. Obviously, the intent of this rule is to reduce greenhouse gases. Whether methane is converted into CO2 by burning it or oxidizing it really makes no difference to the intent of these rules. And I appreciate your concern for industry in Oregon to make sure that the rules are clarified. So as you said, people don't erroneously invest in something that is in fact harming our environment. So I fully support the rule change and greatly appreciate the work that you're doing to make sure that the intent of these rules are carried out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Brad Reed. Go ahead, Brad.
Good morning, DEQ staff. Thank you for undertaking this rulemaking. It demonstrates DEQ's commitment to this young and incredibly important climate protection program, which is supported by so many Oregonians. It's disappointing, but not surprising to see corporate polluters and fossil fuel companies immediately search for loopholes to continue polluting as usual, when an overwhelming number of Oregonians want climate pollution brought down and a swift transition to clean energy. Amazon has awfully big climate-friendly ambitions and plans, and I'm sure people within the company who want to make sure those promises are kept. But vastly increasing the use of methane gas and emissions from that in Oregon runs counter to the climate pledge, a promise Amazon is so proud of. They paid to have millions of dollars to have it put on the side of an arena. The gulf between pledge and action is wide. We have plenty of clean energy resources in Oregon and many willing, skilled Oregonians who would be happy to build solar and wind power for anyone, including Amazon, who wants to do business here. For a company built on speedy delivery, we hope they know we're not looking for speedy delivery of wildfire smoke or speedy delivery of heat waves or rising sea levels. That's what burning fossil gas will do. Oregonians want a clean energy economy. We want speedy delivery of renewable energy, speedy delivery of good paying jobs, speedy delivery of clean air to breathe. We want to deliver a better future to the next generation, not lock in decades of fossil fuel use. Oregonians want speed delivery on targets in the climate protection program and accountability for corporate polluters. I strongly support the temporary rules to make clear this kind of fossil fuel cell energy is regulated under the CPP, and would urge you to make the rules permanent as soon as possible. And I might have jumped in without saying, for the record, my name is Brad Reed, and I am from Milwaukee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Nora Apter. I will unmute you. Go ahead, Nora.
Thank you. Good morning, DEQ staff, and thank you so much for the opportunity to comment and express support today for DEQ's proposed rulemaking for the Climate Protection Program. Again, for the record, my name is Nora Apter. I'm the Climate Program Director for the Oregon Environmental Council. OEC has long advocated for a statewide program to cap and reduce emissions from Oregon's top polluting sectors. And like many others here, I was deeply involved in the extensive year-and-a-half-long rulemaking process and was pleased to serve as a formal member of the DEQ Rulemaking Advisory Committee to help inform and design the CPP rules. As we've heard, the CPP is absolutely essential to achieving our state's climate pollution reduction targets, and it was adopted with overwhelming public support. It is absolutely critical that this program is effectively implemented as intended. So I'm therefore extremely concerned that Amazon is seeking to expand fossil gas use and avoid accountability under this cornerstone climate protection program. Amazon's proposal to use on-site fuel cells that run on fossil gas to power their operations at energy-intensive data centers will result in an enormous increase in gas use. And as DEQ shared, the gas that is used in a non-combustion process will result in essentially the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as combusting the gas. So we strongly agree with DEQ staff that it is critical for our local distribution companies and their industrial customers to have a clear understanding of their covered emissions, especially with climate-fueled extreme heat and wildfires and drought already impacting the lives and livelihoods of Oregonians across the state. The last thing we need is a new fossil gas user coming to Oregon. Giant corporations like Amazon should be leading the way on reducing climate emissions because they have every means to do so. And Amazon and the gas distribution companies that work with them must be regulated under this program. So OEC strongly supports this proposed rulemaking that will provide necessary clarity to affirm that the requirements of the CPP apply to gas users like Amazon and the gas utilities that supply them, and in turn, ensure the environmental integrity of this essential program. So we applaud DEQ for being proactive in taking this action and are really hopeful that the Environmental Quality Commission will take up and approve this proposed rule amendment as soon as possible. We'll be sending or submitting written comments as well, but for now, we'll just thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Next up, we have Tim Miller. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Tim.
All right. Good morning, all. Thank you to the DEQ team for giving us this opportunity to consider and chime in on this important temporary rulemaking. I'm with Oregon Business for Climate. I'm the director of that group, and we are, our mission is to support ambitious, equitable, and effective climate policies that help Oregon lead in addressing climate change, this crisis, and this opportunity that we need to address together. And I'm fully supportive of your efforts to make sure that this rule, the Climate Protection Plan, is effective in addressing GHG emissions as broadly as possible. I was part of the RAC, as many of you know, and I'm a big supporter of this program and all the good it can do, both in addressing emissions, but also in bringing benefits to impacted communities and addressing co-emissions and other things. So big support to DEQ's team in addressing this, this apparent loophole. I do want to say, however, that I'm a little concerned about the solution. I am a little concerned about captured and stored within a product, because you know, you can imagine products where emissions are captured and stored for some temporary storage and then emitted later by some use of some product, or some oxidation of some product, or some decomposition of some product. And I'm worried that DEQ doesn't want to get into a whack-a-mole situation here where it's needing to relook at language as emitters or other industries have solutions that, or have uses that satisfy the language but don't satisfy the intent. So I really would just ask you to triple check that this language is the best you can do in solving this this challenge. I know that, for example, sequestration in plants, I think, is not an issue here, but you could imagine, you know, if someone put the CO2 into places where lots of plants were grown, and then argued that that CO2 was therefore captured in a product, and then it was sent on, and then those plants decomposed shortly thereafter, that would not be very effectively captured. But there are many other notions of capturing that might satisfy this language, but not satisfy the intent. We want this program to stimulate innovation, to spur Oregon's leadership in addressing climate change. You don't want this program to stimulate innovation in satisfying the language, but not the intent. You don't want people chasing loopholes. So just think once again to be sure that that language is the best you can do. Maybe it's the right language for the temporary, but then by the time you get into the fuller rulemaking in 23, maybe there will be a different solution. Don't know. Just want to ask you to double check that. And again, strongly support your addressing this issue with the rules and addressing this specific one, but let's not design the language around a specific user with a specific loophole, if you can. Thank you so much, and really support your efforts.
Thank you. Next, we have Angus. It looks like you're muted, and it doesn't appear that I can unmute you. There we go. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Just one moment. You didn't have, gotcha. Okay, you didn't have the sound on before, and now I'm going to unmute you, and so you'll see a message that just says to, there you go.
Yeah, I still have.
Still having issues. What you want to say one more time? Try that again. Okay, you should be unmuted now.
I don't, maybe we could, maybe Rachel will take the
Yeah,
next.
I
comment to
will.
figure it
Angus,
out.
I
Yeah.
will work with you on the side here through the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and call the next person really quick, and we'll get right back to you, Angus. So sorry about that. The next person is Kara Saylor.
Well done with the name pronunciation. Thank you so much. I'm Kara Saylor from the Green Energy Institute. GEI is a climate policy and energy law institute housed in Lewis and Clark's Environmental, Natural Resources and Energy Law program. And we just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to comment here today. We support DEQ's decision to move expeditiously to clarify the climate protection program's application to these emissions. As you've heard today, and as you know so well, the CPP is absolutely critical to achieving Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And this proposed amendment will assure the regulation is implemented in a way that achieves those goals. So additionally, we agree that the temporary rulemaking will bring certainty to the entities regulated by the CPP. And so we support this amendment. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try again, Angus, and if you could, I'm going to ask to unmute you, and then if you could just accept that, and we'll try again. Can you try to say something, Angus?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Great.
Yeah, well, good. Okay, and I can hear you, but I can't see a thing. Don't worry about it.
That's okay. I started your video, but
It's the blind leading the blind here. So,
thank you.
Angus Duncan, I represent the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, here in Oregon. And without going through all of the data and the arguments that DEQ staff have presented today, I just say that NRDC supports the staff reasoning and recommendations, and we subscribe to the proposed modified rule language. Although I would also identify myself with the asterisk that Tim Miller proposed, since we have established, certainly when I was on the Global Warming Commission, the limitations of, for example, storing emissions in wood products. Notwithstanding all of the wood products that we have created and used in Oregon, emissions from wood products are a net positive, adding to emissions concentrations in the atmosphere. So I agree that DEQ might want to look at that. I would also just say that NRDC is appalled that Amazon would seek a side door exit from its obligations under the CPP. If Amazon were permitted to release emissions from oxidation, certainly other emitters, will seek their own exemptions and ultimately be undermining the effectiveness of the CPP. I would note that Amazon submitted its own data on its carbon footprint to the NGO Carbon Disclosure Product, and was given a grade of F on its work so far. So Amazon has a long way to go, and this request of DEQ, or this demand on DEQ, frankly puts it further behind in its efforts to meet the obligations of its climate pledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Bascom Grecian. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I'm Bascom Grecian, and I represent the fuel industry in Oregon that provides clean, reliable energy for the economic prosperity of all Oregonians. My question would be, there seems to be a lot of verbal emphasis based on equity. in the temporary rulemaking, but the concern would be, where is the equity really being considered when 50% of the companies that would be adversely affected by further restrictions are actually 50% minority owned?
Did we lose you?
No, that's the question.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, Basham, did you have a comment on this, on the temporary rule, or?
Well, that's the comment.
Yeah, I would say, as part of the climate protection program, and I know we're here primarily to give comment, we did do a fiscal impact analysis, and we did actually also look at an equity analysis. So we're happy to talk to you more and provide those materials to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Next we have Kathy Moyd. I'm gonna unmute you, and there you go.
Before, I'm just going to check though, Kathy, because you did give us a comment already. Did we just want to make sure?
I just wanted to respond to Tim Miller's suggestion and recommend that you find a way to make sure that the sequestration is on a more permanent basis when you print the final rules.
Thank you for the comment, Kathy, but Rachel, I'm just gonna check to see if we have any other folks on their hands. Okay, let's just wait a few moments and see if let's give folks an opportunity. Thank you so much so far for the comments that we received today, but we do want to give folks an opportunity to see, people might be thinking. So we want to just stay on for a little bit and see if anyone else wants to raise their hand and give public comment. And then what I might do while we're waiting to see if anyone wants to give a comment right now is maybe just share our wrap-up slide. I will put that up on the screen. And again, I'll remind folks, I think the next slide is our wrap-up slide. So I'll just do a brief wrap-up, but we're just going to wait to see if folks want to raise their hand and let us know if anyone else wants to give comment at today's meeting. We did have I think we had as many as 95 people on the meeting today. So we want to thank everyone again for making time and turning this around so quickly and joining and giving us public comment. I think we see maybe a couple raised, so I'll check back in with Rachel.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. We have one person, Pat Delaquil again. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. I was just wondering with a question, would it be appropriate at this time to, since you have time, to open it up to kind of questions and answers? Because there's some clarifications I would like to explore.
Hey, Pat, I'm just going to wait. I'm just waiting to see if we have other comments.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and just do the wrap up, just so folks have this information. So once again, if folks still have comments still raised, go ahead and raise your hands. So like I said, we are requesting public comment by 4 p.m. on October 31st. We have up here, if folks needed, just the general climate protection program information website. We did want to let folks know, if you go to that climate protection program information website, there is a link to the 2022 Climate Protection Program temporary rule information. So that's where like the materials that were circulated for today's meeting are saved. We will also be posting these presentation slides, and also the web recording will also be posted. And then again, just a reminder that the Environmental Quality Commission meeting is on November 17th and 18th. You will see like the agenda and the materials for that meeting. And you can see here, we provided the link to the EQC meeting. So again, that is where you would see when we release the staff report and when we have this final language for the proposed rule amendment, you're actually going to go ahead and see it on the EQC website. Okay, folks, do we have any other questions?
Looks like we have someone that just came in from the waiting room. I don't know if we want to just maybe give them a moment because they just got here.
And okay, do we have any other raised comments? I think, Pat, to your question, if we could, you know, obviously if folks have questions for us, they can email us at cppinfo at the address that's on the website. If we have one clarification, or we can take one clarification question, Pat, if you had one. But I'm just going to see, I want to make sure that if anyone has comment, they raise their hand. Okay. Okay, so Pat, if you'd like to just ask your one question, if we know the answer, we're happy to give it to you. If not, we can definitely follow up with you.
Okay. Yes, Nicole, I guess I'm just curious about the term oxidation as it's being used here. From my understanding, yes, there are processes for oxidizing natural gas, but there's no oxidation process that I'm aware of whereby you can get hydrogen out of natural gas. That's a reforming process. And so I'm, you know, to me, this rule is still the way you wrote the rule is rule change is effective, but I'm still curious about the terminology here and why we're focused on the term oxidation for these on-site power systems, because the only thing that's oxidized, to my knowledge, would be the hydrogen that's produced in the steam reforming process. And maybe that's a little too technical for now, and we can follow up with a written answer or some clarifications if that's easier. Sure.
Thanks for the question, Pat. I'm gonna answer that by saying I do not have the technical expertise to answer that question. If anyone on my team wants to chime in, feel free. We are primarily relying on the information that's provided to us from our emissions reporting team. So we're happy to follow up with you on that. And, you know, obviously, as you just mentioned, you know, we're learning about these processes as they're being presented to us. So we are, as we're having this temporary proposed rule, you can see that. So we are happy to kind of look into that more and make sure we follow up with you.
Great, appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Pat. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead. I don't see any other hands raised at this time. So again, we did our wrap up. Again, we want to thank everyone for giving us the public comment and for giving us public comment so quickly on this. Once again, you have all, you know, the public engagement we receive in the climate protection program. It has been so instrumental to us as we've gone forward and worked on the climate protection program. It's been incredibly important, I think, for the Environmental Quality Commission as they adopted the climate protection program. And we will obviously keep you all posted as this temporary rule amendment process continues to move forward. So thank you again, everyone. I think with that, we're going to actually adjourn the meeting.